oorlog in Irak is voorbij. De puinhopen roken nog, maar de eerste bulldozers trekken het land al binnen. Nadat de coalition forces Bagdad eerst hebben verwoest, zijn er nu vooral Amerikaanse bedrijven die de wederopbouw van Irak mogen realiseren. Opvallend is dat deze bedrijven vaak mensen op de loonlijst hebben die afkomstig zijn uit de Amerikaanse politiek. Is hier sprake van belangenverstrengeling of is het een nieuwe globale manier van zaken doen? Een van de bedrijven die op deze manier opereert is de Carlyle Group. Op hun loonlijst staan mensen als George Bush senior, James Baker III en oud-premier John Major. De Carlyle Group is een private investeringsbank die weinig in de openbaarheid treedt, maar die een van de grootste Amerikaanse investeerders is op het gebied van defensie, telecommunicatie, vastgoed en financiële dienstverlening. Wat is de Carlyle Group? Wie zijn de mensen achter deze groep en hoeveel macht heeft Carlyle?
Carlyle is a massive private equity firm, and what a private equity firm does is essentially raise money from wealthy individuals and companies and funds, and then turns and invests that money in a slightly higher risk form of investing than, say, the stock market or the bond market.
What they do is they buy the stock directly from the company. They take ownership shares and often controlling shares, but they do not buy it on the public market. And they often have control of the companies they buy, which means that they do not have to, because the companies are privately owned, privately controlled, they don't have to, they're not subject to the securities exchange laws in this country.
They'll purchase the company for a fraction of what it's really worth, and then turn the company around and sell it off for a huge profit. It's called the buyout practice.
The list of knowledgeable institutional investors in aerospace defense is a fairly short list. And I think it would be widely acknowledged that at the top of that list is the Carlyle Group, located here in Washington, D.C., and considered by most people to be the premier investor in aerospace defense over quite a number of years.
What is new about Carlyle is the size and the dimension of their success. My understanding is they are now the 11th or 12th largest defense contractor, a multi-billion-dollar annual enterprise with an almost obscenely high profit margin.
So please welcome Frank Finelli. Frank?
Well, super. It's great to be here back at the conferences that are put on here. As Jerry mentioned, the Carlyle Group, we're headquartered here in Washington, D.C. It's a global private equity merchant bank, and we probably do more leveraged buyout and venture capital investing related to defense and dual-use technology than any other private equity firm in the world. The defense industry valuation will grow primarily from two factors. One is that either the size of the defense pie gets bigger, as it has been over several years, or the slice of the pie related to that particular part of the defense industry gets bigger.
The Carlyle Group plays in industries and in an area that are heavily influenced by politics. And in order to do that effectively, they hire some of the best-known politicians from all over the world. The
first thing is, where do the dollars go? What is the defense budget and what does it look like? This is the way it's commonly captured by the DoD controller. And there's roughly $380 billion in the FY04 defense budget that was recently submitted.
They hire defense experts like Frank Carlucci or Frank Finelli. They hire politicians like George Bush Sr. or James Baker III, and they hire businessmen, a number of MBAs, Ivy League MBAs, very, very bright business people from around the world.
Most people think about this topic as simply the Iron Triangle, the relationship of the Pentagon with Congress and industry. So I'm a practitioner who has been on all three sides of this triangle over the last 25 years or so. and it really has been a lot of fun.
The Iron Triangle is in some ways a uniquely American phenomenon. It's the confluence of the military, big business, and politics. And the combination of these three things is something that a number of U.S. presidents in the past have warned against. In particular, Dwight Eisenhower was very upfront about warning against the possibility of creating a military-industrial complex. By that he means a group of a business built around defense and military that becomes so large and so powerful that it's actually able to influence the politics of war. Nothing sort of personifies that euphemism of the Iron Triangle better than the Carlyle Group. They have it all in under one roof. Carlyle was founded basically on a fluke. A couple of guys, this guy Steve Norris, who was a Marriott executive, got together with David Rubenstein, who was a former Carter aide. The two of them met frequently at a hotel in New York called the Carlyle Hotel. It's up on the Upper East Side. It's a beautiful, old, plush hotel.
I always liked Carlyle. It sounded English. It sounded old worldly. It just seemed to have the right kind of ring to it.
So it was essentially, this sort of fabricated legacy of sounding like they had a history of success and big money, old money.
And ultimately, at the end of the day, no one had a better idea.
But they made a very strange decision. They decided to base the company in Washington, D.C., which at the time no one could really understand because all private equity firms of this nature were based in New York.
But as we talked to people about it, particularly some of the people that both David Rubenstein and I worked with, they thought we'd lost our minds. That it was too late, that what do we know about establishing a merchant banking business? I was a finance guy from Marriott and David was a lawyer, but we had this dream to build a merchant bank, a private equity investment firm that could take capital and intermediate that capital into companies or real estate or venture capital. At the outset, we really didn't envision entirely where it might go. We saw it simply an opportunity to take advantage of Washington and the people here and the access that people had to transactions.
So to base the company in Washington, D.C. was a very strange decision, but as it turned out, it proved to be an extremely successful decision because of the direction that Carlyle eventually went in, which was to play in these very heavily government-regulated industries and to use ex-politicians to sort of pave the way for them.
We started buying shares of a company called Fairchild, which was here in the Washington area, because we thought it was very cheap.
And what kind of company was that?
It's defense business. They had a satellite business, which we thought was very attractive and undervalued. And we invested in Fairchild. At one point, we had, I think, almost 25% of the company. Mm-hmm. And it was ultimately sold, and we made an enormous amount of money. And we began to see the opportunities in that area, and which is one of the reasons why, at the end of the Reagan administration, we were very interested in Frank Carlucci.
I will name as the next Secretary of Defense the best qualified man in America to carry on CAP's work, Frank Carlucci.
When Frank Carlucci came on board, he was coming straight from the Pentagon as Secretary of Defense. He had just, Reagan's term had just finished and Carlucci retired. He came on board and really took them in a completely new direction into defense. This was a time, bear in mind, where defense properties were worth almost nothing because the Cold War had just ended, and this huge military buildup that had taken place during the 80s had suddenly evaporated, which marked a great opportunity, and no one knew that better than Frank Carlucci, who had been in the Pentagon watching this whole trend happen firsthand. So Carlucci came on board and was able to take Carlyle 180 degrees in another direction. Sure enough, a year, 2 years later, the Gulf War hit. And everybody knows that wartime is boom time for the defense industry. So once the Gulf War hit, these properties skyrocketed again. And Carlyle made a ton of money. They did very, very well. They really cleaned up during that 3 or 4 year swing. And after that, Carlyle said, hey, having these politicians on board is pretty great. I mean, they know things that nobody else knows. In fact, Frank Carlucci was setting up policies while he was in office as Secretary of Defense that he's now capitalizing on as chairman of Carlyle Group. It's a brilliant scheme if you think about it. You set up the policies, you leave office, you go into business, and then you exploit those policies. They picked up George Bush, James Baker,